So I'm going to go through what starch actually is. Now, starch is how plants store glucose. As animals, we store our glucose, I should say, into glycogen. When we need the energy, we'll convert the glycogen back into glucose, raises our sugar levels. And then plants store that glucose as starch rather than storing it as glycogen. So both glycogen and starch are what we call polysaccharides. So they're very long chains of glucose joined up together. So you heard about eat your starches, basically eat bread, eat rice, eat all of these potatoes, well, because they got vitamins. You could debate about bread and bread, starch, potatoes. Yeah, it's not that much. But anyway, we're going off topic. Now, starch is insoluble in water. It does not actually dissolve in water. So that is an advantage because it won't be soaking up water from the plant. So, if the plant has, needs water to go up in it, last thing you want is the plant storing starch. And then it's like, oh, wait, that's water. I'm going to grab onto the water. The plant has uses of that water. It doesn't want it to get absorbed by the starch. It also takes a glucose. Individual glucose will take up a lot of space and it compresses it into starch. So starch is lots of glucose joined up together in a very compact space. And then whenever the plant needs energy, it will convert the starch back into glucose. Now, to make starch, you need to use the carbon dioxide, which is in the air. We're increasing carbon dioxide by burning fossil fuels, something we shouldn't do. Also, light energy. So the light energy is used to make glucose. So all of this is used to make glucose, and then we later join it up to make starch. Now, one important part is in the plant cell, there's something known as chlorophyll, which is green. And this green chlorophyll is very crucial for capturing light energy. So photosynthesis all makes the glucose, and then we later join up the glucose into making starch. So I could write down the equation over here. You get the CO2, which is the carbon dioxide. You get the H2O, which is the water, plus light energy. And this will make glucose. Now, the glucose is a very interesting thing because this is the formula for it. Do remember the chemical symbol for it because you do get asked for it sometimes in the exam papers. And it also produces something else, which is oxygen. Now, starch can be stored in fruits. It could be stored in tubulars, in the roots. It could be stored in a lot of places. We call this typically sinks. So a source is what creates the actual glucose. A sink is where the glucose is actually stored as starch. Now, us human beings, we can break down the starch into glucose. We produce enzymes which help break it down into glucose, and we use the glucose for energy. Now, how much carbon dioxide is in the air, how much water, how much light energy can all influence how much starch you end up producing. Now, oxygen is a byproduct of photosynthesis. We can actually sometimes see oxygen being created by plants. So some plants live in the water and you see bubbles coming out of the plant, and that bubble is oxygen gas. So starch as well as glycogen are known as polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are like, for example, glucose, and you join up the monosaccharides to make a polysaccharide. If you join up many monosaccharides, that creates a polysaccharide. And a polysaccharide is starch as well as glycogen. So we get the carbon from the carbon dioxide, we get the hydrogen from the actual water. And the oxygen over here, you see oxygen and oxygen also given off. That comes from the carbon dioxide. It's split apart and you get the oxygen. They have done scientific experiments on this, and it's very difficult to do to prove that you get the oxygen from the carbon dioxide over there. They use something called an isotopes. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because it's more about physics. You don't need to know about too much about it. But they've saw like, oh, this oxygen is actually identical to that oxygen. An isotope, for example, is oxygen 18. There's oxygen 16. They're all oxygen because they all have the protons of oxygen. This is a bit of chemistry and a bit of physics you don't need to know about. But they found out, hey, when we give that specific oxygen over here, we're noticing it over there. And they've done some science experiments and they found this out.